Welcome to Musicians versus the World, the podcast where we explore aspects of music and musician life that may not have been covered in music school. I am your host, Christine Smith. Today we are talking with composer Tom Third. We're going to learn about his experimental music and his signature sound, as well as his creative process as he composes for film, television, and installation artworks. And I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. Now, a little bit about Tom. Tom Third has scored over 250 hours of film and television and has been nominated for the Canadian Screen Award 9 times, winning in both 2010 and 2014. He was also the winner of the 2004 Volkswagen Score Competition sponsored by the Berlin Film Festival. After graduating from the Ontario College of Art with a major in new media and film studies, he went on to sign a recording deal with Network Productions, and then pursued film scoring after the release of 3 critically acclaimed electronica CDs. His work can be seen globally in dramatic series and documentaries for Showtime, HBO, Fox, NBC, PBS, CTV, and CBC. Recent projects have included 4 seasons of Coroner for CBC and CW, Search and Prey, produced by Mark Harmon for the USA Network, The Listener for CTV and Fox, and Shoot the Messenger for CBC. Tom also regularly collaborates with fine artists on more experimental film and installation works that have been shown at art galleries throughout the world. So, Tom, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to Musicians versus the World.
Thanks so much, Christine. Real pleasure to be here.
I can't tell you how excited I am to talk with you. I've listened to your music, listened to some of your work, and it just is so exciting to me to be able to chat with you and figure out how it is that you hear things and you create your music. It's just, I'm going to geek out. I'm just warning
Sure thing.
you right now. Can we just jump right into it? I know you use a lot of source music. I know you've used like an earthquake microphone even, and you use a lot of ambient. You use things like pots and pans, and you manipulate those sounds. Can you just kind of go into your musical composition, like genre, or I don't know, your process and how you do these things?
There's kind of, when there's downtime, there's hardly ever downtime kind of in this business, right? But when I've got downtime and I can just record a bunch of stuff, I will just ransack the kitchen and go out on my bicycle with sort of a mobile recording rig and just collect a bunch of sounds, whatever it is. So, I've snuck into parking garages with drumsticks and a cello and whatever, and set up in that space and just record stuff, in that huge reverberant space and bang on all the pipes and air conditioning units and whatever. And then figure out what to do with that stuff later. So there's usually this sort of mad recording process, collect everything and anything, whatever tickles my fancy, and then sit down and hack through it and see if I got anything that I can use or, edit it down to drum sounds or something like that. I don't really know where it's going to go at all when I'm doing it.
So you don't go in with like, okay, I need this sort of sound. I'm going to go. It's much more experimental than that.
Yeah, it's just a crazy freeform, bad dash through some natural environment. No, I don't know. Pretty rarely that I'm going after something in specific, I think.
So you'll just go out and you listen. And then when you come back in, you think, does something just spark your creative ear? Or how do you know when something works?
I'll be listening to stuff. I'll be listening back to the stuff I've recorded, and let's say in the case of the cello, like I'm not a cello player, so it is literally like banging on the cello with drumsticks and dragging it, through a space or something like that, and then I'll just hear things that are like textures or little melodic inventions of some kind. I'll listen to something. I'll go, that's like the first couple notes of a melody, and maybe that thing is the second half of that. And then I might write on top of that. It might sort of inspire me to write a kind of a melodic thing, or it will just sound cool, end up being kind of a texture. Most of the stuff I do in terms of content is dramatic and dark. Typically, people hire me to do that sort of soundscapey stuff. So a lot of the stuff does find its way in one way or another, even if it's just a pad or a drone or a squeak or something like that.
So you'll take those sounds and you will actually make it into a pad, or?
Yep. I will sample the heck out of them and get them into, contact or something like that and see if they're playable.
Okay.
You kinda get a sense, ultimately, it's sort of like DJs working with, vinyl, that it's like, "Oh, I know I can use that sound," right? The "wah" or whatever it is. So you get a sense of what will be a playable kind of a sound or might be useful or will loop well, it might create a little rhythmic something or other. Um, so there's a lot of time spent doing that, building these sort of electronic instruments that then I can just play quickly when the show starts. And you're into that TV schedule where it's like you got 4 days to do the thing, so you don't have time to run off into the woods and bang on trees with an axe. You gotta just keep working. So I try and have these things kind of ready to go.
Okay,
And
so you're
so
like
there's a
a
bunch of
palette.
stuff that's not been used yet in anything, that's just sitting in a folder waiting to be unleashed on some, unsuspecting showrunner or something like that. So just keep adding to the bin, the library of stuff.
Yeah, I love that. And then so when you get your episode or whatever it is that you're going to be working on and you're spotting that scene, you can think, oh, I was just creating a sound that will work or a texture that'll work perfectly for this scene. Is that
Yep,
how that works?
exactly. I'll build up I'll create a song file, a template that might have 100 of these weird things. And then if I'm looking at a scene, it's like, oh, let's just see if there's anything in the tickle trunk that will work here. And it's like, oh yeah, that's almost thematic, and I can use that. And that's happened quite a bit where I've been improvising on an instrument or something like that. And then that ends up being some kind of signature sound or something like
Yeah. And do the showrunners usually respond well to this type of experimentation?
depends on the showrunner. I would say I would say yes, they love it. They really, because it sounds and feels new to them just as an approach. It's not like this is radical or reinventing the wheel, right? This is an old tradition that goes back, 100 years. But, yeah, they love it. They'll hear something, they'll go, "What is that?" And I'll go, "That's like some, wolf, shark, whale sounds or wolf calls or something that I've processed, or that's my cat or something, or that's the fridge door." And everybody will sort of erupt in laughter in the playback. It's like, "Oh, that's what that was." So it's just sort of fun
Yeah.
because the mission is usually, "Tom, we want something new. We want something we've never heard before, blah, blah, blah."
Right.
That's kind of every composer's job, I think, right? It's like we want a theme that sounds like nothing anybody's ever done. There's only 5,000 TV shows that have been made. Have at it, right? So you're always struggling to bring some kind of, I think, novelty or something new to the table, right? We hear this in TV themes we hear all the time, right? Hans Zimmer brings in the bagpipes, and everybody goes, "Wow, bagpipes! Who would have thunk?" In Dune or something like that. So
Mhm.
yeah, there's always a push for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And
People like it,
yeah. Well, and then
in
it
short.
really makes the show stand out too, because that whole sonic sound along with all of the visual, it's just yeah. And so they probably call you because you're so experimental. They say, "Oh, we want something new. Let's call Tom."
I hope so. I think that's what happens. But there's lots of people that don't phone me for the reason that I won't that I'm not the right fit. I'm too dark, I'm a bit too weird, too something something. And, kid shows, I don't get those calls even. As much as I would love, be fun and, I've worked for Sesame Street and a bunch of stuff, but that would not be my thing.
Oh, you never know. I think
You never know.
if they gave you a try, I bet they would love what you came up with.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be dark. So does that come from, I know you started out with sampling and hip hop, and is that just kind of a natural progression into this new experimentation?
Yep. They sort of arose for me at the same time. When I started doing stuff, it was just literally as samplers appeared in like 1981, 1982 was just when I was starting to fool around. And there were no samplers available for the common folk, right? There was the Fairlight, recording Peter Gabriel records, and that was it. So I was doing stuff with turntables and with cassette decks and 4 tracks and trying to get that sound of loops and things, and when literally like tape loops in art college, like working with tape loops and doing it sort of the old school way. Um, and yeah, it all happened at the same time. Hip hop, craft work, early 80s, mid 80s, hip hop, all that stuff sort of just landed right when I was just sort of coming of age making stuff. So I'd been using synthesizers a lot, but that idea of working with found sound. Plus, it freed me up from having to be, I'm not a great piano player. That's my first instrument, my only instrument, like not by any means. I'm just really a kludgy player. And as soon as I was sort of introduced to these tools that you didn't need a huge technical facility to play a vacuum cleaner or a turntable or pots and pans. I thought, well, this is my medium for sure. I don't have to practice. I can be weird. And that just became part of my MO, I think, and sampling too, working with samplers. I still use samplers that way. I mean, I don't play the cello, but I can play one note and then I can play another note and I can cut them together and I can cheat my way through these things without having to actually learn how to play.
But you do have to train your ear to do this and to kind of understand the balance and everything.
Yeah.
How did you train your listening?
I don't know if the training is the right word so much. That makes it sound rigorous. It's more like, you just start hear it's just, you hear, there's a tonality in a lot of the things that you'll record. There's a resonant frequency, and you think, oh, it's got a bit of a melodic thing, just like the wind, blowing through a
Yeah.
picket fence or something like that. You just start to hear those things.
Hmm.
I mean, my work's not, for the listeners, I mean, my work isn't only made from this stuff. I end up
Right.
using the same sample libraries and Omnisphere and all the junk that people use to make shows and do film scores and stuff. But it's
Yeah.
definitely augments those tools for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, right. So as you're doing this, you might use those just kind of as a foundation or as like a little sparkling or a little like something or other on top of it just to give it a little extra something.
Yeah. And I'm pretty interested I used to do a lot of collage work when I was in art college, right? And that would be like you'd sort of be combining spaces. You'd have a picture from somewhere and a background from somewhere else. This idea of combining spaces that didn't or weren't meant to go together. I'm still interested in that sound in music where you might have a traditional orchestral palette in the background, but a weird glitchy loop on top of it that almost sits in front of the real space. It just artificially intrudes on this actual space or something like that. And a lot of the music that I listen to and really like has that kind of that electroacoustic hybrid
Yeah.
classical slash cut up, you
Yeah.
know.
I was thinking one of your albums that reminds me of it. One of your songs, Ant Farm. Do you
Hmm.
that has more of like I can kind of see what you're talking about because it has that jazz, but then underneath it has these other textures, and I can see where you're thinking about that collage sort of background foreground sort of sound to that.
That's a good example because I was listening because I studied jazz and I still listen to jazz and it's a fast breakbeat sort of drum and bass drum loop. But then I brought in real players, jazz guys, to play solos on top of it. Sort of so that was really fun for me to put that organic and looped thing together,
Yeah.
you
So
know.
what is the process when you bring in real instrumentalists? Like, not real, I'm sorry. When you bring
Yeah.
in like recorded instrumentalists.
Um like people come in and play
Yeah, so what's
like
the
music.
process when you're composing that piece? Do you have them come in first or do you lay down the tracks and then have them come in after?
In the context of scoring, I usually have something laid down for efficiency's sake, and because the tempos are pretty strict, because we're working with locked picture, and you want to match all of these hit points and all that kind of stuff. So I usually lay something down and then bring somebody in and go work your magic. Here's a play. I've left some space for you, and I usually try not to. It depends what we're doing. I try not to overprescribe the part or play it exactly like this or something like that. Usually I want people to come in and kind of improvise in
Yeah.
some sense the same way I do with a lot of stuff.
Yeah, so I'm thinking that this whole collaboration takes a whole lot of trust because the showrunner has to trust you to work your magic. And then you have to trust the musicians that you hire to work their magic too. How are you building these relationships where you can just trust each other so much?
That's an excellent question. And I mean, in the case of the last couple of projects I've worked on, I did the show Coroner, and then I just did this big documentary called Black. And, in both these cases, these are people that I've worked with for decades. For the last 20 years, I've sort of worked with these people. It's always a bit scary going in at first, right? You don't know if the marriage is gonna work. It's really like a first date, and there's a lot of awkward conversation and like, "I think so, maybe, huh? What?" And, but as you get to know each other, um, it gets a little bit easier. And I find television particularly, um, it's not just the composer that they're trusting, it's everybody, right? The writers, the actors, the DP, all of that stuff, everybody's in a mode of, "You must trust us to just get this done," because there's not a ton of time to reinvent the wheel. Once you press go, you make that show happen in a week. And, I find the best showrunners that I work with are the best because they trust the people they work with. And even when you mess up, and everybody does, you don't quite get the thing right, it's too late, you just gotta send it out. Um, that happens to everybody on the show. The writers, the actors, "Not the best take, that wasn't my best scene." And because it's a sense of family, I find, on the best shows, they know that you did your best. You put in all the hours possible, and no one is scolded or made to feel like they messed up. It's just like, "It's okay, Tom. With next week, episode 6, we'll get," you know, right? We know that that didn't work. So there's a lot of loving support. And in both of these things I just worked on, and actually most things I work on, everybody's really super pro about letting people, encouraging people not to continue to be experimental and take risks and do their best work, even though that might not work 100% of the time.
Mm. Now, when
So you
something
just
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, so it just the trust thing just sort of builds as you go, I think, like any relationship.
Just builds over time and keeping that communication open.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of it. It's a huge part, as I'm sure your listeners know, of all of this sort of composer stuff. The communication is half the job. Writing the music is definitely a big part of it, but a lot of it is diplomacy and, pitching ideas and modifying your ideas and checking your ego at the door so that you are not, a prima donna. It's a team. It's a team effort. It's the best part about it. It's the part that freaked me out at first, being kind of a loner and all those kinds of things, is getting involved in this team effort while you're, pushing the ball up the hill. Um, it's turned out for me to be the most enduring and fantastic part of the job, I find.
Really?
The
Really?
family. Yeah.
So what was the turning point from going from a loner to a family for you?
Out of necessity, I would say. I really loved the work. It's just, yeah, if you wanna be on the team, you have to be a team player. So you have to figure that out. So I used to collaborate less. I used to be a little more hermetic in the way I approach things, a little more precious about stuff. And I think you just get a little more relaxed after you've been doing it for a while, and it's like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, sure, I'm more open to collaboration and just more I'm just better at the job now." So, and things that I thought were about sort of creative vision were actually kind of holding me back a little bit. Like the idea of trying so hard to defend some of my own ideas or something, it actually restricts you a little bit. The more open you are to collaboration with everybody on the team, the editors, everybody that you're kind of directly working with, the better it is. You kind of let go,
Yeah.
you know?
So now when you mean defend your ideas, that means if they come back and say this cue isn't working, try something different and you kind of get defensive and upset about it? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So inside, you think, "Oh god, I love this one. That was my baby," and I present it to them and they don't like it. And, we always revise it anyway, right? It's not our film or our show or anything. But occasionally I will say, but here's why I did that. This is, why I'm defending it. See what they say. They often just go with their instincts, but they always know the show. I do trust directors, all of the directors I work with. I trust them. They know the material, the writers. They know it better than I ever will. It's based on personal experience that they've brought to the table that might go back 20 years, some family thing that they might have be drawing inspiration from. So, and then I come in like a week before the mix and blah, 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 and do my thing. Like, what do I know? So I am absolutely interested in hearing what the director has to say. And a lot of the process is teasing that out of them. And the writers like, what do you guys mean by this? What's this? What are we doing here? What's this about for reals? You
Yeah.
know,
So it's trying to
that's fun. I
understand
love
where
that.
they're coming from.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So now what usually is the turnaround time? Especially if you're doing a network show, there's lots of different episodes. How much time do you have to score one of these episodes?
When you get up and I mean, you got a little more time in the first season. There's, depends. I've had done done it all from 1 day to 5 months or whatever. But I think it probably averages a week to 10 days per episode.
Mm-hmm.
On Coroner, we were sort of, in a couple of seasons in, a week per episode. And that means you get the picture lock on Monday morning, say, and you spot it that day. And you need to kind of get at the top to bottom of the show out kind of by Wednesday night or Thursday morning to producers so they can give you notes, and then you kind of do turnarounds on the weekend and madly get into the mix on Monday. So I say 4 days to people. That's about as fast as I've ever had to do it.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes 3 days or a couple of some crisis or something. But anyway, so you're working fast.
Yeah, that is very fast.
It's not a bad thing. I used to think when I started that was impossible to do, to write, a half an hour of music in 4 days and mix it and everything. I just thought that's impossible. And then I got faster and faster at it, and I discovered it's actually not impossible. It's hard, but it's not impossible. You get it done. And there's a silver lining in that when you are working that quickly, you are plunged into kind of a creative free fall where you can't second guess any of your instincts. You just have to execute it and just like do it. And for me personally, that actually puts me into a creative space that I have trouble getting into on my own. If I've just given an infinite deadline to do something, like when I was doing my records or something, I would just take forever and I would tweak and second guess everything. And it was, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And then on this TV stuff, you're in such a panic. It's just like, I'm just going to write some music really fast and maybe it's good. And then you listen to it 2 weeks later and you go, oh my God, where did that come from? Who did that? I didn't even know I could play like that. I didn't know that chord before, because you're just channeling, right? It can be really, anyway, I find it thrilling. It's terrifying, but thrilling.
But then, so you're just in that state of flow. It's kind of like in a good performance when you don't remember how you performed it. You don't even remember performing it, and you could just go back and listen to the recording.
I don't. People tempt, when I'm working on shows, people tempt my own music into it, and I don't know it's mine. Like literally, I'm not even exaggerating. They'll play something back. I'll go, that sounds pretty cool. And they go, well, yeah, it's you from something you did. And I don't know. It's one of the 10,000 cues I've written for some, I don't know what it is.
Isn't that incredible?
And it always sounds worse when you're working on it, right? Because you're trying to fix everything. And then you go back and look at stuff and it's like, oh.
Yeah, because you're too close to it, right? And you just hear it way too much and you get sick of it.
Yep. You're inside it and it's getting stuck on things that aren't important to the listener.
Yeah.
And at some point you make that transformation from the person that's making the thing to the listener, and then you're just hearing it the way people hear it. It's like, oh, that's a show. And I'm listening to the dialogue and following a story. The important stuff.
Yeah. Well, and that's where that collaboration really helps, because everyone, the showrunners or the directors can be those ears that you are just too busy to be. They can give you those notes and help you.
Totally. Yeah, because I'll do something and I think it's good, and they'll just go, no, that's crazy. And you go, okay. And you trust them.
Right.
On the other side of that. They think it's crazy. I don't have time to debate this or go back inside it. They're right. Right. It's crazy. And then I swear 99 times out of 100, I go back and listen to the thing I thought was so good. And it's crazy. They were right. It is crazy. So it's like having that partner or that, older sister or just somebody telling you to, fixing your hair and,
Yeah.
whatever, helping you get through life.
But I like your take on it. There's a quote that you said in a interview a few years back that said, "Let's figure out where the boundary is by crossing it and then walking back." I love that. I
Yeah.
love that fearlessness of just go for it.
That's for me, well, and I think most people's when we look at the shows that we all hold dear, whatever they are this year, Last of Us or White Lotus or whatever it is, right? I think those writers and those actors as artists just go to the edge of something, the edge of crazy, cross over and go, that's nuts. And just bring it back to that knife edge where you are really kind of doing something new but not messing it up. You're just keeping it just in the pocket or something. I think like a lot when I'm listening to when I'm playing or listening to other people's solo and that kind of thing, and I think, oh, they've just brought it to the edge of crazy, right? And they're just holding it there, and the energy in that moment is really compelling, I find.
Hmm. Yeah, and you get that really, really good connection there.
Yep. It's
Yeah.
like when a singer is really belting, right? And they've got they're just like up on some crazy note and like their voice is gonna break or something, and then they hold it and you go, woo, Mariah, awesome. You know?
That's true. That's true. Well, can we switch gears a little bit? I'm really interested in installation artworks, and you've worked and collaborated a lot in this type of thing. Can you explain what that is and what music's role is in this type of art?
So yeah, a whole different kettle of fish
Yeah.
in that. So, my schooling is not music.
Mhm.
It's visual art. And then as I was studying, I was starting to be a painter, an illustrator, something like that. I sort of switched over into film but I was at art college, so I could take robotics and all this other kind of cool stuff. And I took all those things. It was super fun. Um, but installation work, that's, you'll go into a gallery and there's going to be a setup of a something, and it's a sculpture in a room. And then there's maybe kind of a surround sound system or something like that. Or very frequently there's a monitor, playing back a single channel video, they would call it. You just go in and contemplate this thing, right? There's a monitor sitting on a white pedestal or something like that. So it's a different animal. Certainly in the working process, it's like we have tons of time to collaborate in these things and think them through and lots of back and forth and lots of experimentation. We might spend weeks making a 5-minute video versus, whatever you would do in television. And and then there's a real site specific component to that in that so I'll do some sound stuff. It's again usually way more experimental. It's got a loop and not be cloying because it's going to play for 12 hours in a gallery or something like that. And so they're often a little more ambient and a little less hooky. I'm not trying to I don't want them to sound repetitive. But then there's an aspect of it which is what's the room like? Like let's go visit the room where this is actually going to be set up and figure out how to make it sound okay. Like we're going to hide the speakers or we're going to do this or that. It's very frequently a white cube kind of gallery space. Not the ideal place to play back sound. It's a big echoey room, right, with all hard surfaces. So I mix differently. I sort of treat the production differently, so it'll sound sort of better in that space. Some stuff travels around. Um, so you've got to think about different spaces. Um, a lot of the work I've done is sort of more sort of multi-channel surround sound type things. So we're using sort of Macs and different sort of, multiple computers playing back, 20 tracks and having a bunch of speakers and stuff like that. So the concerns about it's a bit more, in some sense, it's a bit more like how people work with video games when you're um, syncing to action that's happening somewhere in the space, but you've got different modules and things popping up here and there. Anyway, it's a different thing, and they're all different. So where a television series, there's a real sort of playbook on how to get a show out the door, right? You've got that spotting session, and then we meet, and there's notes, bam, there's a mix.
Yeah.
Every one of these things, like we sit down and go, well, okay, how are we going to do that? You know, um, I work with an artist, Simone Jones, and she's a roboticist. And so she builds robots. But they project, and they, there's the last piece we did kind of had these rotating projectors on these look like sort of radar towers in the space. Really cool, right? So you go in a dark room and there's projections going on all over the walls, kind of moving around, and then we work with the sound to kind of also move it in that kind of 3D space.
You're moving the
So
sound around?
yeah, we've got, a bunch of speakers set up, and we're just
Yeah.
trying to kind of match this panning in some sense. So when images move, the sound will kind of track along with it, and that kind of thing. So just technically figuring out all that stuff is super fun
Yeah.
and super weird every time. I never know quite know how we're going to do it, and then
And
we kind of figure it out.
yeah, and you have to automate it because you're not going to be sitting there mixing it for 12 hours every
No,
day.
it's got to be automated, and I've never been. Yeah, a lot of the work I hand off to a young person who knows more about computers than I, and they can make it kind of happen.
Yeah.
In the case of this one artist, Simone, she does all of that putting togetherness of it. So I give her some sound files, and she kind of works them into the thing.
Wow. And so it's much more ambient. So there may not be as much of you said hook. So not so much melody, not so much something that will get annoying after an hour or 12 hours.
Exactly right. I used to make the mistake where I'd make it, oh, let's put a big piece of music in here. And then I'd go into the gallery and there's a big piece of music playing and it's driving everybody crazy and it's looping. So, how long it is, right? But people want to kill me. And I saw that right away. So this doesn't work. It's got to be more contemplative. I wanted to get out of that cliche of artwork that's all kind of experimental and ambient, that kind of thing. But bringing these cinematic traditions into that space doesn't always work.
Mhm.
So yeah, I've gone back to sort of some more tried and true with a lot of these things.
Yeah.
And yep.
Yeah. So is your composition process different when you have more time, like you do for these art works, rather than like the 1 week turnaround? Can you get into that
Yeah, there's
state of,
more. Yeah, it's more about the permutations in a sense. I mean, when I'm working on the TV stuff, it's just like, because there are times when I'm working on something and I've only got another hour to finish it. And I go, I went down the wrong side of the ski hill. It's like I'm committed, but I should have gone the other way. And this is not working as well as it could. And then you just do it. But with some of this more sort of experimental art stuff, then you try something and you go, I think I can do better. Maybe there's another approach that can work. And frequently there's not a lot of dialogue to work with, maybe more abstract imagery or something like that. And you don't, so you're not beholden to a lot of those things that kind of keep music suppressed in some sense. So there's a lot more room there's so many more kinds of approaches that can work. So I find I do variations.
oh,
Okay,
okay.
that's one approach. I'll just whap through something. Yeah, maybe that works. Try something completely different. Does that work? Does that work? Sit down with the artist. I got 3 ideas here. See what you think. Maybe we combine things I would never do in TV, present multiple versions of a cue,
Hmm.
because then someone will say, "Well, we want some of this and we want some of that from each of these." And you're like, "Oh no, I've got to mix the bassoons with the bagpipes or whatever it is," right? So, but with the installation stuff and sort of some of the more experimental film work, there's more time to play around.
Hmm. Yeah. But you still but then you have to have a little bit more discipline, right? Because you don't want to get that perfection to get in the way of good. So how do you balance that time and perfectionism with, being good enough?
There's always a deadline at
Okay, there you
some
go.
point. There's always, I always say there's nothing like a deadline, and TV is just tighter. But
Gotcha.
with the art stuff, right, there's only so much time you can play around. So
Gotcha.
I look at the schedule, I go, well, this is the gallery opening in the fall. We've got a month to do this. Okay, let's try a week with this and a week with that, and try and schedule it out a bit. But I sort of rely on those things. I think every composer would say, I mean, or maybe not everyone, but I just my work expands to fill the amount of time I have to do it in. If I got 3 days to do it, I'll do it in 3 days. If I got 3 years to do it, I'll spend 3 years doing it. Because there's just so, you look how long it takes someone to, someone will write a symphony. for 10 years or something, and you listen to it and you go, it's exquisite. And it's the same length of the amount of music that I do in 3 days for a TV show. And that's why it doesn't sound like we're writing symphonies, because we don't have enough time to do that kind of necessarily exquisite work. So we have all those kind of, not that I'm ever going to write a symphony anyway, but you know what I'm saying. So yeah, I will sweat the details if I have time.
If you have time. Yeah, yeah. But then again, when you're working for, television or film, it's more about serving the story than it is about that perfection of the symphony and all of the counterpoint and all of that sort of thing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's such a cliche, but serving the story, when I'm mentoring people, we just talk about story. You're a storyteller, you're part of that team that's telling the story. Everything you do has to be about telling story.
Mm. Well, you must do a very good job of it because you have gotten another Canadian Screen Award nomination. So thank you. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
Do you
there
ever
were
get
two. There were two this year. I won for Black. I won for the documentary. And
congratulations?
thank you. That was great. And then Coroner, I was up every year that the show ran and did not win. But I felt good about that. That was kind of like, slow and steady wins the race. It was kind of a consistency thing. I was always kind of in the running. I thought, anyway, I was very proud of my work on that show.
Yeah.
And so I was glad it got recognized as much as it did. And then Black was just a super cool documentary. So that was also a real pleasure.
Oh, that's great. That is great. Well, you have some new projects. Maybe you'll get nominated again. What are you working on right now?
So I'm in documentary mode. So I've got 3 going. One is about one's coming up. It's a women's prison in Kansas City, and sort of the story of these women. Tragic and heartfelt and uplifting, but mostly infuriating. It's just a tome about, the ill effects of incarceration. Maybe not necessarily the best way to deal with some of these problems of abuse and that kind of thing. Fantastic film. The one I'm currently working on is about a Brooklyn beat poet named Stacey Ann Shin, who is searching for her birth mother. And it's that journey. Very
Wow.
cool film. And then the last one is about repatriating artworks that were stolen by the Nazis during the Second World War and getting them back to their rightful owners.
Oh my goodness.
Also, really cool film.
That is incredible. Those are very, very different from each other. How do you adjust your approach to each of these different types? I mean, completely different
They're all completely
tones.
different. There's sort of like a Delta blues vibe for the Kansas thing, and then the artwork, the paintings going back to Germany. I don't know what we're doing with that yet, but it's going to have some sort of classical kind of component to it because there's a lot of stock footage and period stuff.
Yeah.
And then what's the other one? Oh, our Brooklyn Beat Poet. It's sort of like Jamaican lullabies and stuff. So it's anyway, they all run the gamut. That's why I love this job, is that you're tasked with, hey Tom, here we go. We got some Jamaican lullabies and we've got some Teutonic, brown shirt footage, and we've got this and that, Delta blues. Have at it. And in a lot of cases, I have to research, I have to inhabit these other styles of music and see what they're all about. And that's fun. It's like being paid to do research. I used to do a lot of commercials back in the 90s, and you'd be just throwing anything in, but everything, right? And it would be like I'd get a country and western song. It's like, well, what does make Hank Williams sound like Hank Williams? You got to get in, listen to the bass line, and figure out the timing, and like, okay, there's that, and then you get something else, and then you get something else. So it's like being forced to read the classics. or
Hmm.
something like that. With a lot of this stuff, it's like just somebody handing you Plato's Republic and go figure out what that's about. You go, great, I finally get to read this. So with a lot of this stuff, if I've got to write these Wagnerian operas for, our World War II film, then okay, great. Let's listen to more Wagner and see what's going on. Um, yeah. What I mean, am I terrified? Absolutely. In every
That
one
was
of
my
these, and
next
I think
question.
like in every single project that drops in my lap,
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, 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 I'm up. I can do that. Great, And then it's like, let's do this thing, and then I, hang up the phone like I'm from the 1950s, and and then you think, oh my God, what have I just said yes to? But
Right.
then you call your friends and you figure out how you're going to do it. And a lot of times, it's a matter of like, I think, okay, well, I just need two of those amazing soloists to kind of come in. They're just going to help, bring this thing home. Like, so working with the vocalist now on this new film. She's amazing. So it's just, you just know when you can bring in a musician like that, it's just going to be, I'm saved. I don't have to do it all myself. I've got this amazing soul singer that is just going to take this thing to the next level. So,
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah,
That's
that always
incredible.
helps.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah, I can't wait to watch those when they come out and hear all of these different types of. You have to be so flexible and just so willing to learn to do your job well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. The short answer
Yes.
to that.
Yeah, you do. I have so enjoyed listening and learning from you. Do you have any last minute advice for up and coming composers or musicians or anything like that?
It's the advice is so I do a ton of mentoring and the advice is different, really depending on the age group. But I think like the common thread. And so first off, I don't have a ton of musical training, like nothing really official. I studied jazz piano as a teenager for a couple of years. So I continue to have imposter syndrome. I just don't have, epic amounts of music training. Um, but I get work and I write music. Um, so I think for one thing, I'm not sure what the advice born out of that is, but mostly for people to be daunted and not to be and to plunge in whether or not they think they're qualified or not. To not be intimidated by all the talent out there. Like that your talent is here in your voice, not voice, but you know what I mean, your aesthetic. And that's worth something. That's worth a lot. And it's just a matter of finding the courage to kind of let your freak flag fly. I think all showrunners, artists, record label people, they're interested in your vision. And so it just doesn't matter. I think people can just dive in. But then the other thing I would say is uh, for as long as one can avoid or avoid the idea of audience. I think there's a moment for all of us as young artists, when you're a teenager in your parents' basement or whatever, where the act of creation is just an ecstatic and transcendent experience. And that work is very, very pure and energetic. I find when I listen to my old stuff, I'm like, I love that. Who was that person? They were unhinged. And it was because I didn't think anybody would listen or was listening. And so I was really just tapping into my own crazy. And when I hear artists doing work like that now, where they're just fearlessly expressing themselves without the thought of whether the audience is going to intervene or judge them or anything like that, that's, I think, the most exciting work across all disciplines. So I think it's like, don't forget there was a time where you made work and there was nobody telling you what to do. And can you tap into that no matter what the situation is? I still think about this when I'm working on a show. Like I'm hindering myself. I'm self-censoring. I'm trying to think about what, not just the audience of the people that are directing me on the show, but the audience that's watching the show. I'm thinking about what they want. That's bad. Gotta
Hmm.
gotta kind of just recenter yourself, find your voice again, and then and then re-emit, regurgitate or whatever.
Yeah. Wow. That's a difficult thing to do.
It is difficult. It gets harder and harder for
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
to act without knowledge or without prior knowledge, or to act innocently in the creation of things. I think about that innocence, and you don't even know you've made a mistake, or you don't know your musical grammar is messed up. It just sounds good, and you think it is good.
Yeah.
Anyway, I see that when
Yeah.
I'm working with younger people. I go, oh, I need to get me some of that innocence and rage and exuberance.
hmm Yeah. And that passion and I think confidence that comes with youth as well, for sure.
Yeah, just unfounded, but confident nonetheless, right? Which is so great.
Absolutely. Well, Tom,
Unwarranted.
Tom Third, you are just such a joy. Thank you so much for taking the time and chatting with me and telling me all about your creative process and the work that you're doing. Thank you. I just appreciate you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much. A real delight. Really had a great time.
Great.